In these problems, we are graphing square root functions. And in these problems, they're actually giving us some really good advice. It says graph the leftmost point and then 3 additional points. So what do they mean by the leftmost point? Well, in a square root function, what's underneath the radical sign can never be less than 0. A negative number doesn't make sense to take the square root of unless you get into imaginary numbers, and we can't graph imaginary numbers on a graph like this. So the leftmost point is going to be where this is 0. So if we want to pick that leftmost point, we can look at this and say, what value could I put in for x here to make this whole thing 0? And if I were to do that, that would be a -1, because a -1 plus 1 here would make what's under the square root sign equal to 0. And that's going to be our leftmost point. So let me actually make a chart of values here for x and y. I just put in -1 for x, and what happens there is that this value becomes 0, so the whole function becomes 0, and this is our y value. So -1, 0 is our leftmost point. Let's just go ahead and graph that. -1, 0, right there. Okay, now let's just pick a few more points to shape out the rest of the curve here. And the smartest thing to do is to be clever about the values you plug in for x, so that what's under here becomes a perfect square. So we want to make this value here, x plus 1, equal to 4 or 9 or some value like that. If I wanted to make this equal to 4, well, actually, if I wanted to make this equal to 1, that's a good one, I could put in 0 for x. So let's put in 0 for x. This becomes 1 under here. I take the square root of 1, I get 1. So the value for the function, or y, is just 1. So there's a point. And then let's try to make this value under the square root sign equal to 4. So I'd need to put in 3 for x, because 3 plus 1 is 4. So we'll put in 3 for x, and then we take the square root of 3 plus 1. Square root of 4 is 2, so we get the point 3, 2. And one more point we need, let's try to make this value equal to 9. So we'll put in 8 for x. I'm running out of room here. So 8, and then this becomes the square root of 9, or 3. All right, so we've got our leftmost point. We've got 3 additional points. Let's go ahead and graph those. So 0, 1 is one of our points. Oops, sorry, 0, 1. There we go. 3, 2, that's here. And 8, 3. And then we can sketch in this curve. So the square root function is like this little tail that trails off here to the right. And it starts out pretty steep, and it gets shallower and shallower as it goes on. All right, let's try one more for practice. Here we have x minus 4 under the square root sign. So what we want to do is put in a value that's going to make this 0. Well, and that's pretty easy to see. 4 minus 4 would be 0. So we can put in 4 for x and get out 0 for y, or for the value of the function. Now, let's try to make this be 1. I could put in the number 5 for x. 5 minus 4 would be 1. That would return 1 for the value of the function. Let's see if we can make this be 4. I guess I'd have to put in 8 for x. If I put in 8 for x, 8 minus 4 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. And one more. Let's try to make it be 9 in here. So that would be 13 minus 4 would be 9. And then the square root of that would be 3. So here's our leftmost point, 4, 0. So that'd be right here. And then we have 5, 1. And then we have 8, 2. And then we have, I'll just have to estimate this, 13, 3. So there. And we'll sketch in our curve. So that is a little bit of work with graphing square root functions.